All right, different accents in English. Of course, there is the native accent that a lot of people wish to speak with, or they want to be able to speak with either an American accent or a British accent. Leon, what accent do you hear uh, most frequently, and is it difficult for you to understand speakers with this accent?
In terms of the English language, I don't hear too much other English accents. I mean, we're from LA, so I would think that we encounter maybe Singaporean English accent. We do hear like maybe a British here and there, also Australian. I don't have any difficulty. I think the first time I encountered a, British accent was when I traveled to London, and the first 10 minutes, I'm like, say what? What is it? I couldn't even understand. I had to like give it like maybe a few minutes, like 15 minutes to really adjust my listening to adapt to their accent, I guess. But now I
Which
don't
one
I
is
don't have
this?
any problem. The British accent. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you have to really crane your neck to understand what they're trying to say and
Yeah,
hear
when I
them.
first listened to them when I traveled to London. I mean, when I traveled to
Oh,
London, the first time they were speaking in British accent, that was my first experience of listening to the British accent. I
oh,
was
interesting.
just overwhelmed. I was like, say what? I mean, because they used a lot of maybe British slang words that I didn't know, and
Uh-huh.
and it was just the tone, right? The intonation. And I just had to wait at least, maybe 10 minutes to let my listening or hearing adjust to it, to that type of form. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I
Did you
don't have
have any trouble on that, or when you first listened to British people
no, I
or
don't have a
other
problem with
English?
the British accent, but I think the Irish accent can be a little bit difficult. I can
Mm,
understand it. I just have to really like concentrate to understand the Irish
mm,
accent because I feel like it's very strong.
yeah. But what about your first experience, like first encounter with a British or with an Irish? I mean, what was your experience like on that? The very first time you met a British or when you visited London. I mean, did you automatically
No,
adjust to the language?
it was never a problem, the British accent for me.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
But the
Yeah.
Irish accent is not that it's a problem, it's just that it just requires more focus and concentration.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, when I was in London, I mean, they was like saying, go ahead and use the lift. And I'm just like, what? What do you mean the lift? I have to lift myself?
Oh,
And they
like
said, no, no.
the words
Yeah,
you
the
don't get
slang words, the
also.
words. Yeah, that too. Yeah. And they
Hmm.
said, oh, you're American? I was like, yeah. And he says, oh, for you Americans, that's considered the elevator. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I was like, lift. That was so
Yeah.
unusual for me. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so they have different words. Um,
Hmm.
you mentioned the Singaporean accent, and that accent is not difficult to understand, but I find that accent to be one of the most displeasing to my ears, at least. And I don't mean to
Mm,
offend anybody, but I just don't like the
hmm
way it sounds. That's all. It's not lyrical to my ears. It's because I feel like the stress is placed on the wrong syllables, and so it ends up
hmm
sounding to me strange.
I agree with you. But being in LA, we do have a lot of Singaporean people there, right? That because I worked for a Singaporean bank,
Oh,
and
you
so
did? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
so
Because
listening
I
to
haven't come
their
across many
Singaporean accent.
Singaporeans.
Oh, really? Oh,
Only
okay.
in Singapore. Only in Singapore. Not in LA.
Mm.
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's quite a bit of Singaporeans in LA. I just happened to work at a Singaporean bank, and listening to that every day, it was just like it was different the first time I, listened to them. I understood them or something, but I agree with you. Yeah.
Mm, okay. The the Malaysian accent when speaking English is similar to the Singaporean one, but I feel like it's not quite as strong. The
Mm,
Singaporean one is extremely heavy, and it's yeah, it's very shock. It's very noticeable.
hmm And like the British accent too, they have like multiple types of accent, right? Like we in United States, we have
Oh, yes,
multiple
yeah. That's right.
dialects, right? Same thing with British too, like Liverpool. For me, for some reason, I find that the most appealing and I enjoy listening to are the Liverpool accent. Yeah.
Oh, okay. For me, I think that for me, I like RP, which is like the
Mm,
London accent.
right.
Um, I'm not a big fan of the accent from the north. I think
hmm
it tends to sound more working class, and I don't know. I just don't like it. It's not. when most Americans think of the beautiful British accent, I think they think of the London one, and the
Hmm.
RP,
Hmm.
um, more so than the northern accent. But it's kind of like the southern accent is so different from the standard neutral American accent. It's like that. It's
Hmm.
a huge difference, and
Hmm.
for me, I prefer the London British accent.
Mm, nice. Yeah, I guess that's the most like more the British, I guess you can say the Queen's English, right? Mm.
Yeah, it sounds more
Hmm.
refined.
Yeah, nice. What about like Australian? I mean, how did you find Australian? Deal with a did you travel to Australia? Did you deal with a lot of Australian people? Even I mean, we're from LA, so we get a lot of Australian tourists too, right? So we hear that in
Yeah.
LA. Mm. How
The
do you find
Australian
that?
accent is fine. I don't have a hard time understanding it at all. I
Hmm.
think it's interesting. It sounds nice. It's interesting. It's charming. It's fun. It's there. I don't have a problem with it at all. I think it's a nice accent.
Yeah.
Sometimes if they have a I don't know the different regional variations on the Australian accent, but like sometimes if they're speaking too fast, you have to be like, huh? But for the most part, it's not hard to figure out the Australian accent.
Mm-hmm. And what about like the Canadians, right? Because you really can't tell that they're Canadians, right? I mean, when you listen to them, I mean they sound very much American, except I
Yes,
think
yeah.
when they talk about they always say nice weather, or they're always seem apologetic, like sorry, sorry. I mean, we don't do
Oh,
that, right, as
interesting.
Americans. Yeah.
I think that the Canadian accent you're talking about sometimes, like I've heard it in, well, along the border states, like,
Hmm.
like up, like in Minnesota, North Dakota, or something like that.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
but yes, for the most part, I think like if you're an English learner, you're not going to be able to pick up the Canadian accent because it is very subtle. It is very subtle.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I don't know. It's there's no difficulty in understanding it at all because it's like 95% just like the way Americans speak English, you know what I mean, versus
Hmm.
Canadians, it's that
Hmm.
similar.
Now, a lot of the English learners, they find that pretty difficult sometimes when they're listening to other types of English language, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for them, they can't really determine, like what you just said, Canadians, Americans, they can't really tell the difference. Even with us Americans, they really can't tell if, you're from the North or the South, like say for New York or even, Boston. I mean, to them, they just sound like, okay, you're American, right? Um, but sometimes they think that it sounds that one particular sound in Americans, what they listen to, to Hollywood, right? The mainstream. But they can't really determine if they're from New York or from the South or Texas. Maybe Texas, they always say the South, they have difficulty understanding people from Texas. But other than that, they consider like Americans should all sound the same, but it's not, right?
No, Americans do not all sound the same.
Yeah. Hmm.
uh, the um the Texan accent is can be very strong, and same thing with the southern accent. I kind of like the southern accent. I think it
Yeah, me
just
too.
it delights me. It's kind of like it's kind of funny and disarming and charming, and I think
Hmm.
Americans generally like the southern accent in general,
Hmm.
non-southerners.
Hmm.
There was a study that showed that people felt most, I guess, receptive when they call customer service and they hear a Southern woman, or at least that accent, or that voice and that accent. They feel like they're gonna get the best service. Like they are most welcoming of that person or that voice that picks up the phone.
Hmm.
And I thought that was interesting because I kind of feel like I agree with that. Like for me, I feel that way too. Like when I hear a Southern female voice, I'm like, oh, okay, it's gonna be good. There are some accents and voices that, when they pick up, I'm like, oh, forget about it. I'm just gonna hang up and try again. you know,
Right.
like you just know it's not gonna be good.
Hmm. Yeah, I would really love to travel. I wish I traveled to Savannah in the further south. I mean,
Yeah,
listening to that really southern accent, I find that very pleasant and appealing. So
yeah,
that would
yeah.
be really nice. Yeah. But I never had a chance to visit Savannah. I did visit Atlanta, ATL, but I didn't see too much of their accent. It's different, and when they say, oh, you're gonna feel
Um,
the Southern hospitality, I didn't feel any of that when I was in Atlanta.
I think it's because Atlanta's a big city. That's probably why.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
and New
not like
York. Hmm.
Charlotte. It's not
Hmm.
Charlotte, it's not
Yeah.
Savannah or
Hmm. Yeah,
uh,
and I guess New York too, right? I mean, New York, not many people understand that New York has different type of accent too. Like if you're from Brooklyn or Bronx or Manhattan and Harlem, I mean, they all have different type of accent too. And that's just New York City itself or New York, yeah.
yeah, they have a very strong accent. And I kind of like the New York accent because I like
Mm,
New York. And but I know New Yorkers who live in California and either they've lost it or they have been able to completely mute their
mm,
accent. So they don't sound.
mm.
And I've asked this question. I'm like, why is it that you don't sound like a New Yorker? And I was told, well, it's because I'm educated and I've left New York. I don't
Right.
know. I don't know to what extent that's true because you have a lot of very highly educated people
Hmm.
in New York. Obviously, they've left
Yes.
New York, and yet they still have a strong New York accent. I think that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it is maybe these people who are worldly and educated, they still retain their New York accent because they're proud of it. It's just
Yeah.
like like for example, when I speak Italian, it doesn't
Hmm.
bother me that I have an American accent because I'm
Hmm.
proud of being Italian. Excuse me, I'm proud of being American.
Hmm.
But I think that a lot of times people, when they're learning English, they're afraid for their native accent to slip in, or they would prefer not to speak with an accent at all because they don't necessarily want you to know where they're from. I don't think that's the case for all people learning English,
Hmm.
but I've noticed that there is like depending on where you're from, there's certain people who maybe are just like, I don't want people to know where I'm from, maybe for
Yeah.
they're not politically liked their country, or maybe
Hmm.
they feel a little bit insecure. I don't know. I think that plays a part in why some people want to not have an accent when they speak English.
I think it's all of the above that you just mentioned. They want to fit in, they don't want to be judged, they may be ashamed, they don't want to be questioned where you're from, and
Right.
basically, I think the most important is they just want to fit in. They don't want to be judged.
Yes.
I think ashamed. I don't know about. I think they're maybe ashamed because they have that particular accent. A lot of them wants to perfect it, but you can't be perfect in everything. So I
Hmm.
don't understand because English is a first language. So for me, I mean, trying to learn a foreign language for me, I know I'm not a native in that language, so it doesn't bother me none. And like what you said, you speak Italian, and it's okay having that American accent because that's how we feel as American. But for some reason, a lot of uh, foreigners, when they speak the English language, they just feel, second class, I guess is the best way I can describe it somehow. Yeah.
Yes, they feel like they're afraid that they'll be discriminated against if they speak with a certain accent. And yeah, I think that's true. It depends, right?
Hmm.
If that person happens to not like where you're from, I guess they're going to discriminate against you. But I
Hmm.
don't know necessarily that it's only because of your accent. They just may not like you. A lot of people don't. Maybe they don't think about this. Like maybe you just aren't a likable person, or maybe that
Yeah.
person happens to just not like you, and but you think it's because of your English. But in fact, they just don't like the way you look. Maybe you're
Hmm.
too fat for them. Or who knows? You know what I mean?
Right.
People
Yeah.
don't like you for a whole bunch of reasons. You think they don't like you because of the way you speak English, because you feel sort of like, oh, my English isn't that good. But in fact, they don't like you because of the color shirt you're wearing. Who knows,
Yeah.
right?
Precisely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about the English language, and they say, I want to sound native or I want to sound like you. Well, if you want to sound American, like which one, which dialect do you like? Well, we're just describing New York. You want to be having the LA, you want the Texas accent, you want the Southern accent. So which
Yeah.
accent do you want? I mean, for me, it's like be specific. Now, if you want to sound like the normal, like the Hollywood kind of thing, okay, that's understandable. But yeah, there's different type of dialects, and it's like for New Yorkers when they say something and they say car, right? They say car, you know.
The car.
I'm gonna
The
get in my
car.
car. Yeah, I'm
I'm gonna
gonna
get
get
in
in
the
my
car.
car. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Or
even
the
the Boston,
Boston.
right?
The
Yeah, the
car.
Boston. Oh my gosh, park. I'm gonna park my car
I'm gonna
in
pack the
Harvard
car.
Yard.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna pack the car, have it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how they talk. That's how,
Yeah.
and this is how the New Yorkers talk. So they'll say that's how they
Uh-huh.
talk. That's how they
Right.
talk. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Versus talk,
Exactly.
they'll say talk.
Right.
Uh,
I kind of like it. I kind of like that
no,
accent,
I like
especially
it
like the
too.
Bronx. The
I
Bronx. Oh
like
my
it.
gosh. Yeah.
I like it
Hmm.
very much. I like the Boston accent. Look, I just think accents are cool. The regional accents in
Yeah.
America are cool. But I
Yeah.
think that if you're an English learner, do not learn or aim for these regional accents. I think it's not good for an English
Mm.
learner
Yeah.
because it becomes hybridized. Then you have your accent plus the New York
Hmm.
accent, and it just sounds really strange. I think,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying this because it's me, but I think you should aim to speak like me because I have no accent. It's a
Hmm.
standard neutral American accent. You can't place where I'm from.
Yeah.
Maybe you can, just because if you don't have an accent, you're probably from, or if you have a neutral accent, you're probably from the West Coast. Uh, but that aside, you should aim to have no accent. You should aim to have just a neutral accent, completely sort of sanitized, standardized news reporter, professor lecturing kind of English. That's what you should aim for as an English learner.
Hmm. Precisely. And that, can you imagine they're trying to speak like Scottish accent? I mean, I love Scottish.
Oh
I think
God, please.
Scottish accent is probably one of my favorite. Irish and Scottish is probably almost a tie. But
Oh,
like
really? Interesting.
Glasgow, I
Okay.
mean, wow, yeah. I mean, that's like a different language. You can't even understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't advise anybody to try to pick up these other accents
Mm,
because, again, it may not combine well with your accent, and then it just
hmm.
sounds really ugly. It sounds, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like,
Right.
people might not have a problem with your accent, where you're from, but then when you have that plus you combine it with something else, then it's like, ooh, the mixture just got all screwed up. It's kind of like when you put too much types of alcohol in one drink and you're like, oh, should have not put that one in there, should have just kept it to two or three.
And that's why a lot of English learners, they find American language or accent the most appealing to them because it's the easiest, right?
Mm.
It makes it easier, like you mentioned, the general standard. It's easier for them to learn. Even like English learners that or English speakers like South Africans. I mean, I've heard that there's a South African that's wants to sound more American because it's easier for them and they may like the dialect or the accent of it. So yeah, go figure. Yeah.
I think that for the most part, it's always a good investment to learn more, just better English,
Hmm.
more so than focusing on the accent. Because even if your accent is quote right, even if your accent is native like, that doesn't mean that your English is good. You think of all the people in
Hmm.
America, many people speak with a native accent, but their English is terrible.
Yeah.
So that doesn't work either. But then you have people who speak English with a very noticeable accent. You think of heads of states in different countries speaking English. My God, they speak English so well. However, they have a very strong accent. But yet, you would never listen to them speaking English and say, oh my God, your English is so bad. The accent doesn't make your English bad. Your bad English makes your English bad, right?
Exactly. And pronunciation too. It's even worse. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Hmm.
The unfortunate thing when it comes to pronunciation is that um, some people depending on what country you're from, it's very hard to learn proper pronunciation if you don't have access to quality English education, or if you
Hmm.
don't like English enough to go seek it out yourself via movies and native content like that. But for the most part, if you're just learning English by through your teachers, well, your teachers, depending on where you are, they may not be high quality, and you might be taught bad pronunciation, bad English. And I've seen that. I've seen where people from certain countries, their English is just not great, not because they're not trying, not because it's just because they're taught wrong things. They're taught to
Yes.
use the wrong words. They're taught grammar when they shouldn't be taught grammar. When instead they should have been taught, you know, uh, how to speak better, how to speak more naturally. They end up being taught the things that don't help them improve their speaking, which is being overly focused on grammar. And yet at the same time, being completely wrong when it comes to pronunciation. and they don't spend enough time on that, or maybe their teachers don't even know.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point because, like for example, I'll use India. India, they have multiple type of languages that they teach there, but let's say with the English language, a lot of those teachers may have never even traveled abroad or maybe took the time to really learn the pronunciation. So if the teacher is pronouncing a word based on how their dialect is or their culture is, that's what these students are going to learn from a young age, and then they develop that into their adulthood, and it's harder for them to correct it because that's what they were
Yeah.
taught at a young age. So it makes it even harder. I mean, like Indian people, I mean, they speak English. I mean, that's one of their languages that they speak. But when you have an Indian person speak with an American, we Americans, and not just Americans, but other people from around the world, have difficulty understanding Indian people. I think part of that is the culture because of their how they speak. They speak really fast and they have that intonation, and their pronunciation is very difficult, along with their whether their accent or their thick accent. But for me,
Mhm.
if they have a really good pronunciation and clarity, it doesn't really matter about their accent because you'll still be able to understand them. But it's just the speed and that intonation. It's like singing. So
Yeah,
I've
yes.
heard many times where an American or Canadian says, "Whoa, whoa, wait, you're speaking too fast. Speak more slowly." And they say this to a lot of the Indian people because, I think it's part of their culture and the way they speak. They have that type of tone and intonation type. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the speed, and it's also they put the stress on the wrong syllable, and plus
Hmm.
they go up their tone up when they should be going down. So it's like
Yeah.
everything is almost, it's like you're taking English, you put it in a jar, and you just shake it up. Like,
Hmm.
and that's what happens, right? Because if you speak too fast, if your intonation is in the wrong place, plus your tone rises when it should be dropping, then all of it is just a big mess. So those are the three things that one would have to work on to make sure that those, at least one or two of those things get corrected. Because if you have those three things at play, then nobody's going to be able to understand you except your own people.
Yes.
So, but the easiest thing is to speak slower. Okay, that's the easiest thing, slower. And then the second
Yeah.
thing is to, the intonation is hard because then we're getting into accent. But I guess you can
Mhm.
try not to raise your tone in the wrong place. Don't inflect in the wrong place up, inflect in the wrong place down. I don't know. I think that it can be very contentious to tell people, no, you're doing it all wrong. Do you know what I mean? Because the way they speak in their own country, everybody can understand them. Why should they change? If they change,
Mhm.
maybe nobody would understand them in their own country, right? So.
Precisely. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you have Indian people talk with Indian people, they understand each other. You have Brazilians talk with Brazilian people, they understand each other. But when you
Mm,
start mixing with other people from around the world, they're not going to understand each one of you. So, and you guys are trying to like speak fast, try to sound like an American. No, like what Ben says, speak more slowly, more clearly, and it's easier because remember, a lot of the people that you're going to be meeting, they have different type of levels of their English. They could be a beginner level, intermediate, or an advanced. So if you're speaking advanced level, then you're going to leave people behind that's beginner or intermediate. So keep
mm,
it in a good tone, a good pace. That way everybody can understand you. It becomes more professional. Yeah.
mm-hmm. um and also I think that it depends on, if you are from another country, you're an English learner, you're in America, I think that people might be more patient and might be more open and be willing to decipher your English, if you live on the coast where there are more immigrants, where it's more diverse, than if you are in the middle of America where everybody is just a black or white American. Those parts of America where people have not left the country, they're not as open-minded. So if you find yourself in places like that, and people give you a hard time, well, that's the reason. And it's not because there's something wrong with you, but I would argue that's something wrong with that American, because those of us on the coast, we're a little bit sort of like, well, we're not so sure about those people in the middle who've never left the country, who know only one language, English, who've never seen a foreigner. We're a little suspect of those people also, to be honest, to be real honest. because I think that having a worldview, having left America, knowing other cultures is really important. And I would not surround myself with such a closed person anyway, no matter what country they're from.
Hmm. Yeah. The thing that I also find very difficult, that based on my observation, a lot of the Japanese people, it seems like they have difficulty speaking English
Hmm.
because of the pronunciation. Maybe it's because of their
Oh,
alphabet
yes,
or
yes.
something like that. I
Hmm.
find them, they seem to struggle more in the English language, and a lot of the listeners, like especially the natives, they have more difficulty trying to understand a Japanese person because they
Yeah.
can't seem to get the pronunciation correctly. I don't know. It's something to do maybe what how they teach in Japan, or I mean, I do know there's a lot of American teachers out there that teaches them, but for some reason they have that struggle and difficulty. Yeah, I don't know if you
Yeah.
encounter that too. Yeah.
I've encountered that with Japanese and East Asians, where
Mm-hmm.
they're not able to roll their R's. It's very difficult.
Mm,
Uh, a few years ago, I met this Chinese guy who spoke Italian quite well. However, he could never pronounce any of the R's. So the R, just that R sound, the that would just not exist in the way he spoke Italian.
mm,
So he would substitute it with what. Now I don't know if it's a conscious substitute, but the way he would pronounce it would be the R turned into an L. So
mm,
like
mm,
instead of, yeah, and this happens with other East Asians as well, where instead of saying really, they'll say Lily, right? So
mm, mm.
the L will stand in for the R, and that happens quite a bit. I've noticed.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, like I don't know, like I mean, you're in you lived in Italy, right? So there's a northern and the southern part of accents, right? I take it in
Yes.
Italy, so
Yeah.
it's different how they speak, right? I mean, but when they speak English, can you distinguish if they're from the north or the south, Italy, the southern part of
When they're
Italy?
speaking English,
Yeah, or
no.
do they have that one type of accent when they speak English?
No, I can't tell.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
I can obviously tell if somebody's speaking English with an Italian accent, but I can't tell if they're from the north or south. But that's also because
Mm,
my Italian is not good, so I'm
mm,
actually not even able to decipher between a northern Italian accent and a southern Italian accent, and
mm,
it is markedly different, and yet I'm not able to tell. Um,
mm, mm.
maybe Italians can tell. I'm not
Uh-huh.
about the northern and southern Italian accent, but when a northern Italian speaks English versus when a southern Italian speaks English, I don't know. I'm sure there's a difference.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, because here in Brazil, they seem to understand each other, but they can tell if they're from different parts of the regions because they have, different type of accent in their Portuguese. So, you go from, because in Brazil, I think there's like 27 states. So each of those states have their different type of accent or dialect, I guess you can say. So they know that if you're local or in a certain part of a region, they'll be easily to identify them. Yeah.
But have you met very many Brazilians that speak English, and are you able to understand their English?
Yeah, there's not too many people that speaks English. It depends on their level. I can understand their English if it's considered good pronunciation or, moderate, but the beginner ones, the basic ones, those are harder to understand because of, they other Brazilians understand them, but for me, I have difficulty because of their bad pronunciation or the pronunciation is different. Yeah.
So the people who speak English in Brazil, you'll find them more in the big cities like Rio or something.
Yeah, it's usually in the bigger cities, like if you go to São Paulo in the south, especially
Mm.
São Paulo, Rio, those bigger cities, you're gonna find more people that speaks English. But even in Salvador, Salvador is more in the northeast part of Brazil. It's the first capital of Brazil. Not many people knows that because that's where the the slavery trade happened. So uh, at that place, there's a lot of foreign investors there, a lot of international businesses. So a lot of them can speak English there, but the best known, well known Brazilians that speaks better English or more population that speaks English, I would have to say São Paulo and Rio. Yeah, the
Where you are
Northeast, not many
nobody.
people. Yeah, the Northeast is very seldom. I mean,
Dead
there's
zone.
just a few. My city, I mean. forget about it. It's probably only like less than 5% or of the population, or not even that.
Okay.
And the 5% I'm talking about are usually like the young kids or teenagers that they're young, learning, because some of them are from a well-off family, so they're taking like private English classes and etc. Or attending like
Okay.
English schools. Yeah.
Um, and do they see an importance? Do they see the importance, excuse me, in learning English?
I'd say I would have to say, it's kind of stereotyping. I'd say the more educated, rich people, yeah, they see the
Mhm.
importance because of, the travel, the opportunities, the job. So they see that, so they invest their kids to enroll them in, English schools, academies, so for a better, opportunity as they become older. The more poorer, below middle class, probably not as important. They don't plan on leaving Brazil. They have no desire to maybe travel abroad. Maybe they're not looking in their future goals and opportunities of working for an international company. So to them, they don't need it. So um, to them, a lot of Brazilians that I kind of witness and observe, especially the young people too, is like they only look at the future of this weekend, or the next 2 weeks, or within a month. Beyond the month, they really don't think about their future. I think, as a
That's
stereotyping guy. Yeah,
interesting. Okay.
yeah. But not everybody, it really depends. Like, again, if you're talking about the rich, they look in the future. But if you're talking about more of the below the middle class and the poor, I mean, they don't look much in the future, in my opinion. Even middle class people, they tend to not really look in their opportunity and future of learning the English language. To them is like, I'm gonna enjoy, I'm gonna go party and go with friends and meet people and blah blah blah. And that's
Mm.
what's more important to them. That's their priority.
Mm. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, in let's see, in America, we have, like we said, different regional accents. Um, even in America, the way you speak English, Americans amongst ourselves, we like to try to figure out where people are from based on our accent.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah. So if you're like a New Yorker speaking with a strong, well, this is the thing. New Yorkers have a bad rap, so a lot of people don't like New Yorkers, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So like if they like for example when they're traveling, when New Yorkers travel around the northeastern part of the country, New England, whatever, I think that a lot of like the touristy spots, oh, we don't like New Yorkers.
Hmm.
But so I don't know if they're rushing to be like, oh, where are you from? Because it's so obvious, like when you speak with a New York accent. But I think
Hmm.
the curiosity lies in somebody like me who speaks with a standard neutral accent, where you're not able to figure out where I'm from based on the way I speak. Um, and so I think that people have asked me, people often ask me all over the U.S. like, oh, where you from? Do you
Hmm.
get that? Have you gotten that? Where when you speak, people are like, "Hey, where are you from? I can't place you." Where?
With among the Americans,
Yeah,
I
in
do get that
America.
one. Yes, yeah, I do get that once in a while. A lot of times too. I mean, I was hosting an event one time in LA, and I was hosting like an Asian group, right? More of the Southeast Asian, all over the Asian. It's like the Asian professionals, and I was having like like welcoming new people, and I hosted. It was like 100 people that turned out. And I was going by saying hello to everybody, and this one person, I don't know where he's from, but he's Asian. I don't know if but he's born in the United States, in LA, right? And he started talking to me, and he goes, "So where are you from?" And I'm like, "I'm from here." And he said, "But you have an accent. You're different." And I was like, "No, I mean, I'm from LA." And he says, "But you don't sound kind of like an American standard." And I'm like, okay, who's your friend? I mean, that was the first thing I asked. Who do you hang around with? And you
Mhm.
can see his whole demeanor changed, and he was kind of embarrassed. And he was like, well, mostly I hang around with his own kind, like Asian or American Asian. And I said, and he says he hangs out with white people. And I said, well, you know that you're from LA, right? You know that there's other Americans here, like African American, Latinos, and other, Middle Eastern. And he goes, yeah, yeah. And I said, well, I hang around with a lot of Latin people, right? I grew up with Latin people. I also grew up with white people, African people. So I'm like, these are my friends. I hang around with, I'm diverse. I just don't hang out with one group, a particular group. And he was like, yeah, yeah, you're correct. After having this discussion with you, I really realized that I'm really in my own bubble, that I really need to expand and expand myself in my friendship with, other people, and not just isolate myself with, with his own Asian and white people. So he understood that automatically because he's from LA. He knows that LA is a very diverse, but of course he chose to hang out with certain parts of people. So, I mean, this is I got that kind of stuck with me because you know, having another native Angelino ask me like, where you from? You don't sound American, you don't sound this. I'm like, dude, you're from
Those
LA,
are
you
fighting
should know
words.
better. Yeah. So I mean I just kind of like told them what I felt, and you know, like I said, I grew up with a lot of Latinos. I've been with like gangs, and my friends were in gangs. So you kind of have that, you know, gang accent, and it's hard to take that away from you. And you kind of feel, so what? I have it. I have my own identity. I create my own, and I've been with, surfer, a lot of surfers, top surfers in middle school. So, but as I grew older, I just create my own identity, and whatever I feel, I really don't care what people think. So, and yeah, I had with one white female. I was doing a job out in Northern California. She asked me, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "LA." And it says, "No, no, really, where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from LA." It says, "You don't sound like you're an American." And I said, "Well, where are you from?" And she says, "Well, I'm from Northern." I said, "No, originally, where are you from?" Because I know she's not from California. And she was embarrassed. You see her face kind of changed. And she says, "I'm from the East Coast." Yes, so she's a transplant. So how are you telling me, how I should sound as an American? And she got embarrassed. She just tries to change the subject when I asked her, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm not giving up. You brought it up. I felt offended by it. So let's have at it. And she thought I was like a foreigner or something. Like, let's go. I mean, you brought this up. Let's talk about it. And she felt embarrassed because she's not she's not a native Californian. She's from East Coast, and she just happened to be a transplant and moved to California. So she didn't understand like there's different type of people, and I'm from LA. She's probably never been to LA. And I said to her, "Have you been to LA?" She says, "Yeah, I've been there one time." Okay, one time
Even
doesn't do
within
anything.
LA, there are different accents. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like the
exactly.
the West Side people speak differently from, like, say, East LA. East LA is its own accent as
Oh,
well.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
You know, big, America being very multicultural. Look, white Americans speak different than Asian Americans, than
Hmm.
Black Americans, than Latin Americans.
Hmm.
I'm not saying they all necessarily always speak differently, but I think that there is a tendency for each community to have their own version or their own dialect. Of course,
Hmm.
individuals don't just because you're Latino or Asian doesn't mean you're of course going to adhere to that. Oh well, then you must speak with the Asian American sort of accent, or a Latin accent when you speak English. Not necessarily the case. However, that does exist, though. That absolutely does exist. Like,
Hmm.
like in East LA, there's that sort of Mexican American accent. I don't know how to
Yes,
describe it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Chicano accent.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Yes,
Hmm.
yes.
Hmm.
And that can be very pronounced, despite these are Mexican Americans who have been here for several generations, but they
Yeah.
still they have a very distinct way of speaking that is very different from a white American.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't understand that, like the foreigners. I mean, to them, if you sound American, like I'll use an example, like Snoop Dogg. Everybody knows Snoop Dogg. Everybody knows Ice Cube. Everyone
Mm,
knows Tupac, right? But if
mm,
you really listen to them, they have a different type of accent. You listen to Snoop, you listen to Ice Cube, and you
mm,
listen to Snoop. Snoop Dogg is from Long Beach. Ice Cube is from what is it, Compton, right? Probably not even Compton, but I think it's from Compton. And then you have Tupac. He's from South Central.
mhm.
So it's a different type of dialect,
Uh,
but we Americans can hear the, and identify their type of accent. But the foreigners, to them, they all sound the same. Yeah,
It must
but
be
they're
so
different.
difficult
Yeah,
for English learners because there are so many different types of accents. I mean, even
yeah,
within even within a city. Well, of course,
hmm
a big city like LA, there people speak differently.
hmm precisely. Yeah. I just find it amusing. I mean, I do ask a lot of people that if they have a different type of accent. I ask them because I'm curious. I'm like, it's a great topic, and sometimes I play the guessing game too. Oh, you're from New York. Are you
Hmm.
from Bronx or Brooklyn? Like, how you doing? From
Hmm.
from Brooklyn, right? So
Yeah.
I find it pretty amusing and interesting and a topic to talk about. It's not that we're putting you down and saying, "Oh, where are you from?" It's like, you have that particular accent. No, it's just we're curious.
Absolutely. We are very curious. In LA, where there are, especially in the western part of LA, where there are a lot of transplants, a lot of people, I mean, I'm always, when I was living in Hollywood, I'm always asked, so where are you from? Where are you from? Because nobody's really a native living in
Yes,
Hollywood, except me and a
exactly.
handful of others. But you know what I mean? Like most
Right.
people are from somewhere else. Most people come to LA from other parts of the country to to live out their Hollywood dream and break into the industry. So, yeah,
hmm
that I guess that's the thing about LA is that we've got a lot of people from all over, not just from the US, but all over the world trying to break into Hollywood. And so there's this constant influx of new people, and that's why LA is so diverse because Hollywood
Yeah.
drives the diversity, I think.
Yeah, and that's the great point that you bring up about Hollywood. There's a lot of transplant there. So when you meet somebody from Hollywood and you say, "Where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from Hollywood." You automatically think that they're native, but from Hollywood, right? An Angelino. But
Mm.
in reality, they only been there like maybe 1 year or 2 years. But they say, "I'm from Hollywood." But in reality, no. Where are you from? "Oh, I'm from Mishawaka, Indiana," or something like that. You know. So, but a small
Uh,
town, right? But they're
yeah,
not
yeah,
really from Hollywood, right? Because they're a
yeah.
transplant. Yeah.
It's very
Mm.
interesting because people who are not from LA who move to Hollywood, I mean, I'm talking specifically Hollywood, not just the greater LA area, but Hollywood.
hmm
Um, I think they generally kind of see Hollywood as sort of this strange bubble that they like being a part of because it's almost like to them like a train wreck or a car crash. Like they love it, they love being in it. It's like this morbid curiosity of Hollywood and the machinery in Hollywood and how it works. But then at the same time, they sort of do recognize that they come from a simpler place with nicer people. I always am told that like yeah, and it's really nice to go home for the holidays where I'm around, my people, as
Yeah,
opposed to Hollywood.
that's true. That's true. Yeah. Mm.
So, all right. Well, I hope that gives you guys a good sampling of the different accents, not only in America, but all over the world, and how Americans, or what we think of accents when we hear them. Uh, Leon, thank you so much for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for listening. Hope to see you around next time.
Yeah, see
Till
you
then,
guys
ciao.
in the next video. Bye bye for now.
Yeah, ciao.